let's consider where we are. Act 5 began with the revelation that Lady Macbeth is descending into madness, driven by guilt. Her mind is tortured by the murder of Duncan. The karma, the consequences of overturning the divine right of kings are severe. Remember, at the same time, the audience is aware that there is an army in England preparing to attack Macbeth's castle, an army that has God on its side, led by Malcolm, the true and rightful divine king, and aided by the true and divine English royal family, and of course by Macduff, a man with righteous vengeance on his side after Macbeth slaughtered his entire family, including his babies. Remember the prophecy, beware Macduff, but also the prophecy that Macbeth cannot be killed by man of woman born. Now, those two things aren't really compatible. Why should Macbeth fear anything if he cannot be killed by anybody born from a woman? Those things aren't compatible, or so the audience thinks. So, we are both intrigued and excited by the army's advance, as we do not know how Macbeth will fall, but we know that he will fall because the tragic hero always dies at the end. Act 5, Scene 2, on page 62, is a very brief scene in which the Scottish thanes, the lords, discuss openly the advance of Malcolm's army towards Dunsinane, Macbeth's castle. Look at line 1. We are told that the English power is near, and, most importantly for the dramatic impact of the scene, that the army is near Birnam Wood. Now, the audience is immediately reminded of the prophecy given to Macbeth when he revisits the witches in Act 4, Scene 1, Hubble, bubble, toil and trouble, fire, burn and cauldron, bubble. Now, that prophecy said that Macbeth shall never vanquished be until great Birnam Wood to high Dunsinane Hill shall come against him. Remember, that prophecy stated that he cannot be overthrown until the forest walks to the gates of his castle, and that's one of the key reasons why he thinks he's invincible. But now, Shakespeare tells us, the audience, that the army is near Birnam Woods. What is going on? Something is afoot. Look at line 12. A one-word key quotation, a really useful reference to Macbeth as a tyrant. Now remember, a tyrant is a dictator, an evil ruler. Now learn that one, as it's useful to use in conjunction with the worthy brave Macbeth language from the first act. On line 15, we are told that Macbeth cannot buckle his distempered cause within the belt of rule, meaning that Macbeth has lost control. His lords think that he has gone mad. He's gone insane. Now, because Macbeth is such a poor king, we are told on line 19 that people only obey him in command, nothing in love, as in people do what he says because he is the king, not out of love or affection for him. Now, compared to how loved Duncan was. This is a good scene to refer to if the exam question is about kingship, the qualities of a leader, because Macbeth is clearly a terrible ruler. We are told on line 20 that his title hangs loose upon him like a giant's robe upon a dwarfish thief. Now, this simile tells us that Macbeth is a dwarf in comparison to the giant of a man required to fulfill the role of a king. His own thanes, his lords, are completely dismissive of him. He has lost the respect and faith of those who keep him in power. The key moment is line 30. Now look at it closely. Look at what Lennox says. So much as it needs to dew the sovereign flower and drown the weeds. Difficult on first glance, but when you look at it closely, the meaning is very clear. This is a metaphor that compares Macbeth to the weeds in a garden, something unwanted, something that needs to be eradicated. And he refers to Malcolm, the true heir, as a sovereign flower, something that you would want to grow in a garden. The Thanes have completely abandoned Macbeth and are openly speaking treason. They are willing Malcolm to succeed over Macbeth. But is it treason if Macbeth is plotted against? He has no legitimacy after all. He did obliterate the divine right of kings. Now, in the next scene, Shakespeare immediately shifts the action back to Macbeth's court in scene 3, and we see him unhinged and manic. His mental stability has collapsed. He is receiving word of the advancing army. Look at his opening statement. "Bring me no more reports." He refuses to accept the reality of the situation that he is in, publicly at least. Look at the second line. Another reference to Birnam Wood. Now, given what we've just heard in the previous scene, this is very dramatic timing. Macbeth says he will not be frightened until the woods arrive at his castle's gates. He mocks Malcolm as a boy on line 3 and 4. What, was he not born of woman? It's clear that Macbeth is obsessed with the witch's prophecies, and he's actually abusive to those bringing him truthful messages about the English army's advance. Now, a series of my ultimate favourite Shakespearean insults are given over the next few lines when he calls his servant a cream-faced loon. The servant's face has gone white or cream in fear at reports of the army. He's also called a lily-livered boy and whey-face, all references to the blood draining from his face as he delivers reports of the enormous army's advance. Look at line 20. The servant he calls is named Satan. Now, the spelling is different, but it's a clear pun on the devil, on Satan. Macbeth calls for Satan. He tells Satan on line 23 that he has lived long enough. Satan is clearly a more trusted servant than the others in the court who Macbeth brazened it out to. To Satan, he shows us that despite his cocky arrogance, he is weary of his life. He tells us later in the same speech that he has lost the things that a man should have: love, obedience, troops of friends, and replaced them with curses and mouth honour. People being civil to his face because they have to, because he's the king. Fake friends. Nobody likes him. He knows it. Macbeth shakes himself out of that moment of depressed reflection when Satan confirms that indeed is true. The English army are advancing. Look closely on line 33 when he declares, "I'll fight from my bones till my flesh be hacked." The news of attack has aroused in him the old Macbeth. He's roused out of his depression, his wallowing in self-pity, and he becomes Macbeth the warrior, the Macbeth who brandished his steel bravely and proudly in Act 1. Now, it's interesting that Shakespeare is giving Macbeth an honourable death, an honourable fall. He is to go down fighting, unlike Lady Macbeth, who will commit suicide in a couple of scenes. He asks the doctor about his wife's health. He is told that she has a diseased mind. One of a number of images throughout the play about disease. Macbeth asks on line 41, "Canst thou not minister to a mind diseased?" As in, can't you, a medical doctor, help with mental health issues? The doctor tells him that the patient must minister to himself. No, he cannot help. Most interestingly in this scene, look at what Macbeth says between lines 51 and 55. If thou couldst, Doctor, cast the water of my land, find her disease and purge it to a sound and pristine help, I would applaud thee to the very echo that should applaud again. Pull it off, I say. Here, Macbeth openly acknowledges that Scotland is sick. He personifies Scotland as a woman that needs healing. Now, as a royal, he knows clearly of the consequences of destroying the divine right of kings. The health of the king is the health of the nation. Macbeth acknowledges that Scotland's sickness is him, acknowledging that he is the source of it. Now, we know, the audience knows, Macbeth knows that the only cure for Scotland to heal is for the true King Malcolm to be on the throne. And he will be in a very short period of time. Now, the next scene, Act 5, Scene 4, is really brief. And we're going to focus on it really briefly. The action switches back to the advancing army. And it's a hugely dramatic moment. Think about this as almost like a film, back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. The army reach Birnam Wood. Now, remember, Birnam Wood is a key trigger for the audience. And Malcolm tells us on line 4, let every soldier hew him down a bough and bear it before him. Thereby shall we shadow the numbers of our host and make discovery err in report of us. To summarise, Malcolm commands the army to chop down the trees from the forests and to carry them at the front of the advancing army line in order to conceal from Macbeth's spies how many soldiers there are and make their attack more of a mystery. Camouflage. This is a signal to the audience that Macbeth is doomed. But it also highlights to us once again how manipulative and clever the witches are. Now, remember the word I used a few weeks ago to describe the witches' language and their tactics was equivocation, using ambiguous language deliberately. Think about how it seemed an impossibility that the woods would walk to Macbeth's door. Think about how certain that prophecy made Macbeth that he was invincible, but also think about how easily this prophecy was undermined by the simplest of explanations, chopping down the trees to create military camouflage. So, as ever, use the rest of the time in a lesson to get to grips with the scenes that I've talked about here. Annotate your text using the overview attached to this post, and I will speak to you soon.